some of the implications that I predicted, which is the great thing about being old enough to outlive your predictions, is they've come true. There is now, for this generation, even younger than you, the younger people who are being brought up without even given a thought to the ubiquity of their electronic communications, there is a change of identity that is, I believe, fundamental. There is a communal way of approaching work and thinking and the academic process that is different from the kind of independent thinking, bounded, that I was taught as a young person. And this is just my intuition. But the first time I went to a school to try to assist a group of teachers in a high school, try to understand what was going on, they said they were getting good marks from the industries they were sending students to. Motorola, Baxter Labs, Abbott Labs were in the neighborhood, Northern Illinois. They said the one thing we're not doing very well is training people for work teams, for learning how to function effectively on work teams. And when I asked them what they meant by functioning effectively on work teams, I realized that in my day, when I was in school, we called it cheating. Literally, if you looked at someone else's paper, you were doing something dishonest. Now, I'm a radical pioneer. I was a pioneer in collective work at exam time. And I would always engage Bruce Rockwell, who used to sit right there, where Spaff is sitting, in my exam taking. And I was usually caught and sent to room 127 because they didn't see that I was a pioneer and a far-seeing person. They called it cheating. But quite literally, what is taught today by example and precept is that you must learn to function effectively as part of a group. And the social structures in which young people are brought up now are fundamentally different in that they are all group activities which are heavily scheduled. Now, this is an oversimplification, but there's something to it. So that the boundedness of the individual, I don't think it's an accident, is no longer as clear. And a boundary is where we get our identity. A boundary is what determines our identity, and boundaries around everything, from the individual self all the way up to the geopolitical structures, are exactly what are morphing or being transformed. And that is what's causing us to kind of stretch, to find new concepts, new names, new words, to give these emergent realities a palpable feel so we can get a hold of them. You know, giving new names to things, Nietzsche said, originality, creativity is nothing but seeing 10 seconds earlier than everybody else. The emergent realities that are coming over the horizon and giving it a name. And the names you choose make a big difference. It's branding, it's marketing from one point of view, but it's the human project from another. Quick example. In the 1920s, mail was being carried on airplanes for the first time after World War I. And periodically, people would hop on the airplane as well. And they were bold and courageous and adventuresome souls, and they had a name appropriate to that. They were called aeronauts. Aeronauts. Well, the government was subsidizing the mail planes and wanted to reduce the subsidies and increase fares that people would pay to ride on airplanes. It was a novel thing. But they knew if they called them aeronauts, like we call them astronauts, people would not be able to insert themselves into that category, see themselves in it, because an astronaut is a bold spacewalker, not us. So they needed a new name for aeronaut in the 1920s. What do you think they came up with that enabled people to get a hold of it? What was the creative genius that... What's the word? Passenger. Thank you. Yeah, they said, we'll call it airplane passengers. Now, 10 years ago, I said, what you're going to watch for are space tourists. And that's exactly what we got. But you have to go next, beyond space tourists, because what we need is a category that will enable all of us to see ourselves becoming part of a transplanetary civilization, so that when we go where our telerobotic exploration has gone, which right now is limited to the solar system and a little beyond, we will be able to see ourselves doing that venturing. I was one of the first people, I was told, to apply for a survivor-type program. You know, I was so excited. I heard about it, and I used the net to track down the NBC producers who were putting on the program. What they were going to do was send 12 people to Baikonur, Star City in Russia, and you were going to go through cosmonaut training, and every week the Russians were going to eliminate one person, and the one who was still standing at the end could go to Mir for 2 weeks.
Be careful, the Russian ways of eliminating are different.
Well, I didn't need to. I did track them down, got my beautiful 3-page why I should go sent to them. Called my congressman, Sensenbrenner, who I happened to know, and he was the head of the space committee. And I said, can you help me with this? He said, not you, not anybody's going on the Mir again. We're bringing that damn thing down. It's a fire trap. I said, well, the Russians are cool with that, right? They cludge stuff together with duct tape and baling wire. They don't care if there's a fire, collision. You know, the thing is flying. No, but he had his way, and a couple months later, Mir came down. And my dream of going into space, I think probably forever. And I say this seriously because I've always wanted to go. Well, most people I find in conversation don't want to go, but you will go. You will go to Mars. Your children will go. Using propulsion systems, material science, things that are now being experimented with through black and white budget research. You are going to go. And the 3 major things that are going to impact identity going forward, not only religious but human in its fundamental forms, are information and communication technologies, biotechnologies of all kinds as we reinvent ourselves, and the attributes that fundamentally mean what it is to be a human being, and the advent of a transplanetary culture. Okay, but that's getting far afield. I'm still on page 1, and we've got a lot to cover. Anybody have any questions at this point? This is just kind of trying to introduce the space into which I want us to walk as we deal with what all this is doing to security, to information security, to intelligence, and ultimately to the structures in which you are going to have to build some sanity. Yes?
One comment about the emergence of as you call it, collective society.
Yeah.
Okay. And one comment about what you termed the emergence of a collectivist society. Do you think that's something new, or do you think that's actually a reversion to social models that have existed in the past?
It can't be a reversion because it's something that hasn't existed before in this way or in this form. But what I think happens, you know, and I admit that when you're doing a speech, you sound like you know, so it's just part of being glib, and it comes with the territory. But what I really think happens is that the content of every new technology is an old technology at first. In other words, it doesn't eliminate anything. It recontextualizes it. And at first people say, oh, it's just the same. The Duke d'Urban, for example, hated the printing press because he thought a book printed by such a monster was cold and inhuman. And he only wanted to read books that were handwritten by monks because that was a real book. And yet, periodically, he would hear of printed book that he wanted to read, and he would ask that it be delivered to the monastery in the area he controlled, so they would recopy it by hand so that he could read it. Now, he felt like he was reading something that would have been, I believe, as you alluded, a reversion, but in fact he was reading something new because the printed text itself enabled new things to be said. It enabled new ways of expression. It enabled fixity. It enabled a fixity of thought, as well as vocabulary and spelling and words. It enabled all sorts of things, including the explosion of the language, because an oral culture, prior to writing, would have 25 to 50,000 words max. It couldn't have that many. But with the printing press, you had an explosion in English, for example, to over 1 million words. And so, with 1 million words, you have a palette of 1 million colors instead of 25,000 colors. So even though it looks like you're painting the same landscape, in fact, you are seeing differently, you are constructing a different reality, and then by agreement, you're doing something different. So, of course, human society has been collective since tribal days, and then the days of agriculture and husbandry 10, 12,000 years ago, etc. That part is not new. What is new is the enabling technologies reduce boundaries between people in a way that has fundamentally not taken place before, because the symbiotic relationship to which I alluded between us and our networks is so absolute that we don't see, subsequently we will not see, another way of being. On the downside of the political scale, it means that fascism is set in motion as a much more real possibility, because people who cannot live without constant feedback from text messengers or IMers or other people in whom they live as a node in a network, who literally cannot live without feedback. And